Very pleased to have you all here. I'm Neil Helm. I'm one of the board members. There are a bunch of board members around, pretty much everyone you see looking important, like Jeff and Bob and Lloyd and Dave. We're all on the board. We all work for nothing. The whole group works for nothing, and we thank you for your donations, which allows us to bring in speakers from out of town, like Robert, who I'm going to introduce in a few minutes, from New York. We bring them up from California and Florida occasionally. California breaks our budget, but and if you have, we're a 301c, desperate nonprofit organization. If you ever have an extra 100 that you won in the lottery, please throw it in. We'll use it for bringing in speakers.
Super Saver Miles.
Super Saver Miles, for sure. It helps us bring in speakers as well. Thank you, Lloyd. Okay. Anyone here? I'm setting some people up. Anyone here for the first time? Please raise your hand. Okay. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Where are you from?
Canada.
Okay, welcome, welcome. Good. And then another new person here that I'm sort of setting up is Lisa. And Lisa McCaffrey and her friend Hope Dillard have contacted the IANDS office. And I'm sort of the group for 3 or 4 states. I look after the chapters, sort of one of my jobs. And so every new chapter that comes along, I'm sort of asked to help get them going. And so when Hope contacted me, I'm very pleased. They're a new chapter in Williamsburg, and we're really pleased to see that. And so next month, the end of this month, will be the first meeting, and I'll go out and speak to him on my near-death experience and experiences. And we're real pleased to have another new chapter in the area. And then Joan Fowler is here, probably in the back, way in the back. And Joan is one of the newer Force Be With You t-shirt. I like that. Joan is one of the newer members on the IANDS board in Durham, North Carolina, is where the IANDS organization is located. There's a couple of little brochures up here. If you're interested in near-death experiences and really want to get to know more about your own near-death or near-death experiences in general, the IANDS organization allows you to get into their database of experiences. I've read probably more than 1,000 of them, and they have periodicals and conferences. The next big conference convention is going to be in Seattle, the end of August, early September. And next year this will be in Philadelphia, a little bit closer, excuse me. So the IANDS organization is a good organization. They really are devoted to getting the word out on near-death experiences and bringing together opportunities for us to come together and share our near-death experiences with each other, which we do occasionally in workshops and in other venues. And today we're going to have Robert speak from now till noon. There may be a short book signing. Robert's books are in the bookstore, both of your books.
I believe so.
Both of your books, and if you're interested, run and grab a book and bring it back, and he'll sign it. And so we'll have a brief signing ceremony here, and then all of you who would like to join us, we just walk out and walk up the set of stairs up to the big hospital building, the big horizontal building, where we're going to have lunch together. And there's a neat cafe up there with really good food, really good organic food. Robert's a vegetarian, so he's pleased to hear that. And so if you want to get to know Robert better and get to know some of us board members better and talk about your own near-death experiences, come and join us for lunch afterwards. And then after the lunch, we all come back here for the workshop that our speakers always do, and Robert's going to have a workshop here from 2 to 4 on finding your own death and Discovering Your Heavenly Self. Sounds good to me. So that's how it works. We're pleased to have you all here. If you'd like to get tapes of the speakers, as you can see, we're taping it. And if you'd like to get discs or tapes or tapes of past speakers, we have them. And just see Robert and Bob, and you get you a tape. And if you're not on our web group and would like to be, just give Bob your email, and it tells you always when our speakers are. We try to always be the first Saturday of every month, but it doesn't work. The ARE has, of course, first dibs on this room, and sometimes we're relegated to the second Saturday of the month. We always send out a couple of emails on our speakers, so if you want to be on our mailing list, just give Bob or any of us your email, we'll get you on the list. Our speaker for next month is Bill Taylor, and Bill is familiar to a lot of us in the IANDS community. I guess he started, where's Ellen? Is she back? Here's Ellen. He started the Maryland chapter, I don't know, 15 years ago or 25 years ago, where Ellen served with him for a long time. And Bill Taylor has been active in IANDS for that long as well, 25 years. He's spoken at numerous national conventions and numerous regional outings, and he's spoken here, but many, many years ago. We haven't had Bill here in probably 5, 6, 7 years, so we're pleased that Bill is here. And thank you, Ellen, for getting Bill on the agenda for next month. And he's really good. Bill had a profound near-death experience, like many of us, from Lyme disease, and it's really a bad thing because a lot of people don't know they have it. In his case, he just got weaker and weaker and weaker, and closer to death, and didn't realize. And then it strips the outer layer of your spinal cord, and takes the myelin off your spinal cord, and you lose the connection from your spinal cord to your brain, and you just die from Lyme disease. So he was able finally to get some medical help and spiritual help, and then during that time he had a very profound near-death experience. So Bill is a good speaker, and he'll be fun next month. Have I missed anything? Oh, am I giving away a book? I'm giving away a book. How nice. Gracious. Let's see. How would I spell my wife's name? The book, Practicing Conscious Living and Dying, by Anna Maria Hemingway. My goodness. Is Anna Maria here by chance? Okay. We have, by the way, at least 4 that I know of, 3 or 4 members of our IANDS group here who have written books, published books on near-death experiences. So when I ask, is Anna Maria here, it's not uncommon to have someone from our group write a book like this. I'm not, practicing conscious, I would say consciousness, but practicing conscious living and dying. Okay. Stories of Eternal,
She donated
the Continuum.
book. She donated the book through me.
Oh, do you know her?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we should have her as a speaker then if she's close, whatever.
She's in California.
Well, that breaks our butt. Okay. Diana. Mildes? Vera, Diana. Where is she?
Vera brought the lovely flowers we have today.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. Yes.
Thank you. Thank
You were saying, David, I'm sorry?
Vera brought the lovely flowers today.
Oh.
Oh, thank you, Bill. Thank you very much. Okay. All right. That's fun. Always like to give things away when I don't have to pay for them. But we all do. Of course, it comes out of our thing. Okay. I think that and the last thing I have to do with great pleasure is to introduce Robert Kopecky. Robert flew in last night from Brooklyn, and he's lived around. He's a native Californian and grew up in San Diego and then lived in LA and in San Francisco and now lives in New York. He's a longtime illustrator, children's youth TV programs he was involved with for many times on different networks. Things which, what's the main one that kids?
Sesame
Street.
They're animated television.
Yeah, but oh, the animated ones, okay. And I'm trying to think of the one with the big animals or something that the kids can talk to. Yeah, you could tell all those things without having a kid and had grandkids or anything. Anyway, so that's what Robert does, and he's been on television a lot and radio for his near-death. He's had 3 near-death experiences that the first one he wasn't sure, and that happens to a lot of us. We're not really sure with the first one if it's really is what it feels like. And then all at once it keeps sort of nudging you and saying, hey, we've made a change, you've made a change, and you've now got, I call them gifts. You're now a little more psychic, you're now a little more telepathic, you're now a little more intuitive, and all at once some of these things are happening around you that you know that are happening, and all of these things start, and then you'll have a second near-death experience, which is not common, and then all at once you realize, whoa, this is the real thing, this is big time, and it does profoundly, as in my case, profoundly change the way we live. And a sort of a Renaissance man, Robert Kopecky.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody. It's good to be here. It's good to be anywhere when you've had 3 near-death experiences. I am Robert Kopecky, and I'm either very lucky or very unlucky. It took me quite a while to realize how lucky I was, really. So I thought I'd give you a little kind of an outline of my path to authorship, which is pretty unique. This is where it happened for me, finally. But it started for me in Southern California. I was raised on the outskirts of San Diego, and I grew up in a very difficult household. My dad was a terrible alcoholic, or a great alcoholic, whichever you think. And my mom was wonderful. My aunt was very important to me when I was a kid, but I lived in very difficult circumstances, and so as soon as I could, I started traveling. As soon as I had my '59 Volkswagen with the sunroof, I hit the road and started driving all over the western United States, taking all kinds of different jobs. I had discovered martial arts when I was a kid, and that was very grounding for me. I went on to be a hair cutter and a welder, and I worked on monumental steel sculptures. I could always draw and paint. I never had to take a lesson for that. And eventually that led me to my career. I was accepted at the Art Center College in Pasadena, and I went to school there for illustration and got hired into animation right out of school and worked at that for many years. Met and got married early and had this sort of robust professional life in Los Angeles where I was illustrating all the time and doing underground comics and art directing for newspapers and the like. And that was when my first near-death experience occurred, which I'll skate over right now because I'll revisit it in detail. But just to let you know, I always said for many years that my near-death experiences didn't change me, because I had met so many people for whom one near-death experience was plenty. It transformed them. It changed their lives completely. For me, it didn't so much, because at the time I didn't know of any kind of community. This was in about 1984 or so, And I wasn't aware of Dr. Kenneth Ring or Raymond Moody or PMH Atwater, who were the people who had put out the books by then. And so when I talked to people about it, everybody rolled their eyes, and so I suppressed it, and kept living. Although I went home to my wife one day and said, "How would you feel about quitting everything and going around the world?" And she said, "Okay," and we did that. We sold everything off and headed on a trip around the world, and we were not spiritual people. Neither of us were raised with any kind of church going at all. For me, living in the hills of Southern California, San Diego, the nature was really my church. But we traveled around the world going to mostly spiritual places. We went to every temple and ruin and graveyard and cathedral, and we explored the Mayan underground before it was an eco-tourist place, and looked for tikis in the South Pacific, and did all these things that I didn't correlate to any kind of spiritual path then at all. When we got back to the United States, I got a call. We got back into our material lives, and I got a call that my aunt was dying unexpectedly, and so I was at my aunt's bedside, and she'd been very important to me. I now recognize her as being one of my spirit guides, but at the time I hadn't, figured all that out yet, and that kind of knocked me out of my tracks. There had already been trouble in the marriage, and I ended up leaving that marriage and moving to New York City. This was in the late 80s, and I proceeded then to live a riotous downtown lifestyle that was entirely inappropriate and mostly self-destructive, mostly nocturnal, and constantly at odds with myself. However, I was more successful professionally than I had ever been in my life, oddly enough. At one point I had a drawing style that was very smooth and very perfect, and I ran myself so ragged that I couldn't do it anymore. So I developed a style that had a rough line on it, and the art directors loved it. They called me more than they ever had before for my shaky line style. So that tells you how I managed my life at that time. That led to my second near-death experience, after which, again, nothing changed, supposedly. But I did give up my relationship at the time and leave New York and head out to the desert in Arizona to be with my brother, who was starting a business. And getting married again, I started snowbirding back and forth, and I got engaged. And that led to my third near-death experience, after which I could not deny that something was up in my life. I came back to New York City. I had really a dark night of the soul there, where I'd kind of lost everything. I'd lost my second marriage. I'd lost my career, in great part, was in shambles. And I came back to New York City, and everything picked right back up again. Professionally, I started working as a designer for Cartoon Network, doing children's animated shows, and illustrating for the New York Times and for others. And everything was going great, but it wasn't going great for me. I was amiss in the world, really. I didn't feel like I fit in anywhere with anyone, and I didn't find a community. I hadn't found a community at all. And then 9/11 happened, and I was downtown just blocks away from that event. And walking around for the next week or so, I felt this swirl of spirits around me all the time. And it was something that I was cognizant of. It was a palpable thing to me. And I needed to find some kind of vent or some place to discover what all of this meant to me. And very synchronicitously, I discovered a little house on the upper Delaware River near a party house of some friends from years back. And I bought this little place in Pike County, Pennsylvania. And the day that I came back to town, I bumped into a woman I'd met a couple years earlier, who said that she liked to go to country houses, and I said, well, I just happened to have bought one today. And her name is Sue Pike. So I had been signing all the paperwork for Pike County, and here was Sue Pike, who wanted to come and check out my country house with me. And that was 11 years ago. We've been married ever since then. So synchronicities at work in my life, right? After sitting on this rock here for a good part of about 6 or 7 years or so, I started to have a calling to write. And these experiences that I'd had in my life started to kind of crystallize in me. And I began to write essays, spiritual essays, and put them on my animation design blog spot. And they became more popular than the art that was on my blog. And then I started getting calls from other websites that wanted to run my articles. And at one point, sitting on this rock, the near-death experiences cascaded into me in a way that's very difficult to explain, but it came through pretty deep meditation, years of more than 1,000 hours probably of meditation. And everything crystallized for me in a way that I had to put out. And I sat down and did about 80 or 90 pages in just a week or two. And I Googled spiritual publishers in Brooklyn and found one that accepted online submissions and sent them my 80 pages of text. And the publisher called me back the next day and wanted to have lunch with me and told me that he wasn't going to publish my book, but he knew somebody who would. And he helped me complete that into a 180-page book. And ultimately, Konari, Red Wheel Weiser, published that in 2014. And that's how, at age 58, I became a first-time author. Which, knowing now what I know about how difficult it is to get published and how long people work to achieve that, it was pretty miraculous. And people will tell me what I should do this or that, and I think, whatever I'm doing, I guess it's all right, because I love to write. I love to write about these and to speak about these experiences that I've had. And so with that, let's get on to why we're here. This is the spot, and it looks like this about this time of year. This is when I first go up there, and it's really a beautiful place. How to Survive Life and Death was my first book, and the kind of key quote to it that I open with is, "I'm not afraid to die, I just don't want to be there when it happens." Right? That's Woody Allen said that. And it's because this book was really for people who are dealing with the death experience in one way or another. That they have a fear of it, or that it has affected them in their life, they've lost somebody, or it's approaching them or for somebody else. And so this book was really written, I outlay the 3 near-death experiences in some detail, but it was written to really ameliorate the kind of process of death and what it means, and to put death into perspective for us from somebody who learned about it the hard way. I believe that we are alive before we're born, and we're alive after we die, right? So the nature of my memories. When I describe my near-death experiences, I try as best as I possibly can to keep them exactly as they were the day after they happened. Because I know that memory is unreliable, an unreliable agent of change, and that our memories will self-enhance, will augment and add to things. And so hopefully I'm telling you the same stories that I would have told you the week after it happened. So I had 3 very different near-death experiences, and that's really kind of what led to this, to the second book, How to Get to Heaven Without Really Dying, is based on the fact that I had 3 and they were all different. So it's not the same place that I was going to. My first one was an out-of-body experience. I was living in Los Angeles with my first wife. I dropped her at the airport, and I was driving home on an unfamiliar road at dusk, and this will place it in time. I had a malfunction with my cassette player. And so I popped the tape out, and the big string of tape came out. For anybody who was around then knows, this is after 8-track, by the way.
Yeah.
I was high tech at the time. And I pulled this out, and just as I did that, I glanced off an oddly parked car on an unfamiliar street and went straight into a telephone pole going about 35 miles an hour. I broke out the windshield with my head, even though I had a seatbelt on, and broke the steering wheel with my face, which is what happened. And the very next instant, I found myself at the top of the telephone pole. And there was a street lamp next to me with sort of a moth flying around it, and I looked down, and there was the car with the front end smashed into the telephone pole, and fluid, steam coming up and fluid draining onto the ground. I could look over hedges and bushes into people's yards from up there and saw porch lights go on and people come running out. And I realized as I was looking that the body that was hanging out of the driver's side window was me. But I was fine. In fact, I felt fantastic. I felt completely liberated. I felt more at ease than I had ever felt my entire life. Like this was the solution to everything in many ways, to all the difficulties that I'd had in my life. I watched the ambulance arrive. I kind of levitated downwards because I don't recall having had a body. I obviously remember being myself. I was seeing through my eyes, apparently, so to speak. But I couldn't contact anyone. Nobody could hear me. I couldn't make any difference. I'm here, I'm okay, that kind of thing. I felt the whole time that I was not alone, that there was someone behind me, like a benevolent presence that was sort of hugging me, almost shepherding me, that then said into my ear, "It's time to go," basically, and shepherded me off into what I recall as being sort of a warm gray cloud bank. I don't remember exactly what happened between then and this beautiful pastoral place that was like nature or a park, and this kind of an interview that I had with a personage. I don't really remember them being a body, but I remember them being a person. And I don't remember exactly what they looked like or who they were, because I don't think I was supposed to remember all of these details. And I don't remember exactly what we talked about, but that it had to do with who I was and what I was doing and important things that needed to be kind of hashed out. In real time, about 20 hours later, I came to in a hospital with my head bandaged and in a hospital bed. I don't know anything that happened in terms of the details, the medical details of it. Years later, I got a copy of the medical report, but it didn't say anything about me flatlining or anything like that, so I have no documentation of that sort of thing. When I went back to my life then, I like I said, I couldn't talk to anybody about it really so much. But it did propel me in a way that, in a subconscious way. So that was my out-of-body experience. I went back a couple weeks later and walked around to confirm whether what I had seen from the top of the telephone pole was right. And it was. I had seen all the things that I could only have seen from that spot. Years later, when I was living this riotous lifestyle in New York City, I had a life review, which is another common format for another common motif. And that happened when my lifestyle just caught up with me. It was kind of a toxic cascade of events that laid me out on the floor of my apartment. I was essentially, and this was substance abuse and everything else you can possibly imagine. And I felt paralyzed from the neck down. I could not move at all. I felt all the blood and energy drain out of me completely. And as I lay there, I didn't go anywhere. It wasn't as though I was shepherded anywhere. I did feel, again, free, and this feeling of being enfolded in this kind of luminous field of love, and a sense that I was part of a greater mind, no longer just my own encapsulated mentality, but expanded into a greater mind. I had this entity, so to speak, behind me again that said, "Look here. And in this midst of this brilliant white cloud that had filled in the room that I was a part of then, this kind of a screen opened up that wasn't like a regular movie screen. It was kind of like a box of time. And I watched, as I recall, 5 or 6 sort of episodes from my life. That it wasn't the highlights reel, you know. These were these kind of pivotal, seminal points in my life where I had not been present in a way that I could have been. Times when I might have been injuring somebody, or times when I might have been missing an opportunity that was presenting itself to me, but I was in my way. I was in my own way. I wasn't present. And I remember the feeling of being deeply saddened by the whole thing, and this sense of the importance of each of those moments. And then I started to be able to hear my girlfriend at the time yelling, and her voice got louder and louder, and the cloud started to kind of fade out, and then the textures of the real room started to fill back in, and I began to feel my juices flowing again, and I came out of it. And it took me some time to stand back up and walk around and stuff. But shortly after that, I kind of gave up that lifestyle and started to travel out to Arizona. So that was my life review. About 8 years later, 6 years later or so, then when I was in Arizona, I had been traveling back and forth, and I had a forced return to life experience that you hear a lot of near-death experiencers talk about too. In this case, it was a Super Bowl Sunday. I had just come from New York City to a small town in Arizona, and my fiance at the time was at home baking, and I came out after the game, and this was a long time ago too. This was about 1997. And I got on a payphone to call her, and I was assaulted by a skinhead, by a big punk kid who thought that I was dressed too nice to be in this small town in Arizona or something, and started calling me names and pushing me and stuff, and I kind of talked him down while I was on the phone. He reached in and hung up the phone on me, and I talked him down, and then I had to call my fiance back, and then he came back very aggressively. And I made a terrible mistake at that point. I put the phone down and I punched the guy right on the chin and knocked him out flat. And the people around me in this common area all sort of applauded and stuff because they'd witnessed the whole thing. And so I got this kind of confirmation that I was right to have done that. In retrospect, I realized I was not right to have done that. And I was making good my escape. I jumped on the bicycle I rode and was leaving, and I didn't realize there was a van full of these guys that had witnessed it. And they drove up alongside of me and hit me in the back of the head with something like a tire iron or a crowbar, knocked me headfirst into the curb, and apparently then kicked and stomped me for the worst part of an hour or so. In this afterlife experience, I was still a little bit attached to the physicality of it. I felt like I was in a room. This was not a particularly luminous place this time. There was nothing heavenly about it. It was more terrestrial. It felt more as though I were inside of a body, kind of womb-like almost. But again, held in this kind of embrace of love and this feeling of transcendent unity, and like I was really being taken care of. There was a group of entities around me at that time. And outside I could feel this kind of crunching and, stomping. It was still there. And I did not want to go back. I really was insistent that I not go back. But, and again, I don't remember exactly who they were, what their faces were, or nothing like that. But they all together convinced me that I hadn't done things right, and that I had things that I needed to do, and that it wasn't my time. And they sort of picked me up, as I remember it, a bunch of hands on me, and pushed me through what seemed like a membrane, and I kind of popped through, and I opened my eyes. I was laying on my back on the street in this town, and there was an emergency medical worker over me who said, "He's back." That was my most difficult near-death experience. My least favorite, if you're going to have something. It took me a long time to recover from that. So that was my forced return to life. Years later, here, when all of this coalesced and informed my kind of transformation, my sort of personal transformation, I realized the gifts of each of these. Neil had called them gifts earlier. And so each one had a very specific gift. They were all so different. I went to such different places. They gave me such different things. My out-of-body experience, which is this kind of glimpse into the effervescent reality, this expansive potential of divine consciousness, where the fullness fills the fish in this picture. And it was just kind of a peek into what God's vision kind of is on the world itself. I call this the gift of perspective. It's difficult to get the genie back into the bottle after you've seen yourself from afar. And one realizes that I am not that. That is a vehicle for who I truly am. And in retrospect, and after the years of work that I've done, the gift of perspective I recognize as being the ability to objectively witness the phenomenon of our lives as human beings, right, with a kind of compassionate neutrality. We're able to lovingly detach from the material demands of the world. So it's a little bit like being, up in the upper stands, looking down on the whole thing below, and witnessing people that are all subject to the sensory perceptions, reactions, and lessons that being in human form give us. So I'm a part of divine consciousness and witnessing divine consciousness coming through each package, each form of human beings, right? So as it filters through each package of karmic life information that we are all formed by, we're able to witness that in one another. And for me, what that allows me to do is to not buy into the drama of any given moment so much. I'm able to watch somebody simply express what they need to be expressing because the information of their life has made them need to express that. And the big lesson is that we're all experiencing pretty identical challenges of being in human form, right? And we can be this kind of neutral, compassionate witness to one another. And if we put ourselves in the right state of mind, which is a kind of an aspect of being in heaven, we can have this compassionate view of one another rather than simply work off the surfaces. The surfaces kind of disappear, and you see the spirit streaming through somebody. Even in the worst situations imaginable, it works that way. So that is the gift of perspective that I got from being out of body. The life review, which was witnessing these boxes of time, when there were these instances occurring that I could almost have reached into and moved things around. Very much like this moment of time right now that we're experiencing together. Right now I can reach into it and move things around, right? This is when I can do that. I call that the gift of presence. So it's the ability to objectively witness the profound potential of every eternal moment of life and the power of our conscious or unconscious participation. I was unconscious a great deal of the time, and I had no realization of what power that had in people's lives, the differences I was making by not being present. And we can engage in that malleability in that moment. We're always living in this eternal moment. all experience happens right now, right? So now is the only time when we can ever truly participate in creating our karma, in creating the cause and effect of our lives. So the lesson is to always be open-heartedly present as you possibly can be, and to be engaged with as much conscious awareness as you can possibly muster. Because really important things happen in life in every moment. They can happen in any moment. And if we skate over them unconsciously without thinking about them, we miss a great deal. There are miracles happening. All of this is a miracle, but there are miracles happening constantly in each moment. So presence, that awareness of the eternal moment that we live in and our ability to exist within that and make changes within that right now was the gift of that life review for me. The forced return to life is pretty obvious. It's kind of a no-brainer, right? It's like, you got to get back there because you haven't done what you're supposed to do. I call that the gift of purpose, where finally everything stopped working in my life in such a way that that humility grounded me and gave me a chance to be teachable. Granted, it was in an extrasensory way, it was an extra-dimensional experience that gave that to me. But I realized that when I came back from that and when this understanding kind of crystallized in me, that it didn't matter whether I was going to star in Martin Scorsese's next movie or become another of the 2,000 billionaires that there are in the world or something, but that my life had a certain shape to it and a certain construction that I had taken part in and that I needed to fulfill and that I needed to show up for because I was uniquely qualified for it. Because I had been building it karmically through many lives, I feel. But just the smallest things, just the smallest service done for somebody else may very well be the reason that we're here in many respects, is to fulfill these kind of karmic contracts that we have with one another. So our purpose, the general purpose, I realized, is to remove the obstacles to love in our life. We all have, obstacles to love. And you can witness that in people as they struggle. You can turn on your TV and watch people struggling to try to find love. That's what they're all trying to do, really. So we're here to complete and fulfill those karmic obligations. And not to turn away from them, not to resist them, but to surrender into that calling that we all have. And our karma leads us to our expression, which is a big part of our purpose, of being who you are, of expressing your individuality, of becoming a channel to love, of recognizing love, and therefore to our spiritual evolution. I don't know where that's taking us all, but I think it's a pretty good place. That would be my guess, So that's the gift of purpose that I got from being forced back into this life against my will. Many of the best things I've done in my life have been against my will, actually. That's a lesson right there. What is bound on earth will be bound in heaven. What is loosed on earth will be loosed in heaven. That's Matthew from the New Testament. And why, I started to wonder, are all these experiences different? What does this mean? That's where I got to the second book then, How to Get to Heaven Without Really Dying. The key quote on this comes from the Gospel of Thomas, the Gnostic Gospel of Thomas. The kingdom of heaven is spread across the earth, but men don't have eyes to see it. So the realization for me was that heaven was not a location, but it was this series of experiences that I had. It was a state of being. And after I sat on the rock for a long time, there were moments in my life I recognized when I found this beautiful woman and got married, hopefully for the last time, that this was what I was here for, and this was an experience of heaven in itself in this life. And we've all had experiences of heaven in this life. So I started wondering, what about different near-death experiences? By that time, I had become kind of involved in the near-death experience community, which it was completely inadvertently done, but I'm very grateful for it. I've heard lots of stories and spent time with people in their stories, and it's really a fascinating thing. But it led me to wonder, why are people's near-death experiences so different? And when we talk about heaven, what do we really mean? What are we really talking about? Near-death experiences always have similarities, but they are all often culturally and religiously exclusive, right? So Christians are more likely to meet Jesus. Buddhists will meet Yama. Hindus will meet Yamraja and have Chitragupta read the Akashic record to them. Tibetan Buddhists will enter into the bardos, this series of surrealistic passages that lead from one life to the next birth, a kind of thing. So the end of this life is not the end of illusion. In fact, it might be the opposite might be true. That when we exit this form, all kinds of potential opens up in the world of near-death experience, in the afterlife. And as humans, we have no choice but to attach some pattern recognition, as it were, that we bring as our package of karmic data into the afterlife. And then when we come back, when we're resuscitated, hopefully, we have this language to describe it to one another. And really only this language. There are things that I don't talk about in my near-death experiences because I don't have the language to describe them to you. It's not possible here. I'll meet you on the other side. We'll talk about it there. The same way that lives differ so much in this world, near-death experiences are custom-made in the same way. I think we're dropped into the afterlife, as it were, as we are dropped into this life, into certain circumstances that are in large part conceivably prearranged, most likely prearranged. And then we live our life that is formed by the amount of awareness we can bring to it, the realization of our spirituality, and the ability to remove obstacles between us and the spiritual, to accept the reality of our spiritual existence, and to allow divine consciousness to kind of govern our reality and expand this world into the same kind of amazing potential that heaven has for us. And always within the eternal moment, right? It's always within this moment of presence. So we're always engaging with what we've made or are making of our lives, what we can make of our lives. We're always being shown what we need all the time. In every direction you look, there's something that you need to be aware of. And then heaven and hell are these really karmic states of being. Whenever we live within love, we find heaven, and within fear, we find hell. And I believe that to be true in any life we live. This one, or whatever comes after this, or whatever comes after that, whatever comes after that. So in what way are near-death experiences all the same? I'll turn it back to this guy, because I like him. He's the way that they're all the same. When I died, I entered into what I call the field of divine consciousness and love. I only lost my human body-mind sense. The serial thought ended. The sense of a body that was in pain was gone. I felt that I had been folded into this greater intelligence, totally embraced, supported, and unified in this field of love. And that I was just part of it. That's just who I am, who we all are. In that custom-made afterlife, I was unconstrained by my human form. And I believe that when we're unconstrained by our human forms, we experience consciousness as this active field of love, this formative, energizing, illuminating medium of all positive creation. It's a grounding, energetic matrix of divine potential. And that's happening right now, too. It's happening all the time. It's with us constantly. So any reality that we're living, this is what's manifesting for us. And I became completely teachable. The circumstances of my death, so to speak, had put me in a place where I had attained suitable humility to be able to learn these lessons that, hello, right? 3 times this happened to me. Many people's karma is such that 1 time is plenty. And they're signed on, you know? So what is divine consciousness? What is heaven, then, if it's not a particular place? You know, some people have a flight of stairs that lead to the pearly gates. Other people have a river that they cross, a field of Elysia, all these different kinds of... But what it always is, what's common across the board, is that heaven is pure love. It's radiant illumination, some manifestation of radiance. Transcendent, unity, right? Unify my tongue with the rest of me. Karmic instruction, and this possibility for eternal renewal. And those are the things that heaven, in my experience, actually are. So, can we create that here? Can we consciously round that stuff up? Perspective is a way to overcome our human perceptions. And I call these rungs on the ladder to heaven, because you can't think your way to heaven. You have to act your way to heaven. Unfortunately, it's true. You get to heaven by doing good deeds. You do good things, and you get to heaven. So when you think about what heaven is in your mind and what you would like it to be, the ways to bring it into your life are to apply what your ideas of heaven are. Heaven is, for me, always a very nice place, like here. It's full of very nice people and completely free of fear and aggression, right? There's no competition. There's no arrogance, no aggression at all. Everybody is very, very kind. And so there is this palpable field of kindness in heaven. And if you live with this kind of unconditional kindness in your heart, then you're bringing that aspect of heaven into this world. You're aligning yourself materially with the spiritual aspect of heaven. Heaven is a truthful place that's free of misrepresentation. It's free of false motivations. Everybody is honest with each other. And so honesty is another one of these rungs that we can use, if possible, in this life, to align us. It's a place where everyone is equal. Heaven is a horizontal hierarchy, right? There's no sense of anybody being better than. Everyone is equivalent in God's eyes, so to speak. And so the teachability and the humility there is another aspect that complete that absolute humility and authenticity of spirit is a part of it. Heaven is a very understanding place where there's not even any perfection there. Everybody understands. Everybody accepts and tolerates you. You know, can you imagine going to heaven and having somebody go, look at the shoes. You're going to wear those shoes in heaven? You know, that kind of stuff doesn't happen there. Everybody is all right. You're forgiven for your bad fashion sense. You're forgiven for everything. You're forgiven for everything that happened on a human level. That doesn't mean that you don't have karma that you have to work out, because you do. It's a place of this angelic empathy and complete identification with one another, right? Where our hearts would be completely open to to one another unconditionally at all times. And we would understand each of our experiences in life as being the same as mine, right? And mine then becomes ours because we recognize that we're all the same thing, that we're all part of the same heart mind, this divine consciousness, that we're all really one in God all the time. So compassion, that level of compassionate consciousness, is an aspect of heaven. And lastly, but not least, heaven is a place where everybody would drop anything and help you out whenever you needed help. Unconditionally, with no ulterior motives. There's no quid pro quo going on in heaven. People are simply open to being helpful to you all the time. And so this sense of service without conditionality attached to it is an aspect of heaven too. That's perspective. That helps align you with the perspective of heaven, those, what I call the rungs on the ladder, those actions that you take. Presence has more to do with our being right in this moment, right? Here we all are, in this room, in this spot, at this moment. Whatever's going to happen is going to happen. And it's always been like this. And since it's always been like this, that means that everybody who ever talked about it was right about it too. And so at one point, when I was heading out of New York City, heading up to the river, I had this transformation where I started reading books I would never have dreamt about reading, stuff I was not interested in at all. Ancient scripture and books on psychology and quantum physics and stuff like that. And I started to find these things like the Bhagavad Gita or the Dhammapada, the Gospel of Thomas, or the poetry of Rumi, which I feature in the book, as speaking so directly to me and so much in the present moment, and in fact meaning more to me now than listening to Tony Robbins or somebody like that. Listening to the Bhagavad Gita, where basically God is your cab driver in the Bhagavad Gita, you know. That I started to realize that these were describing paths to heaven and a reality of spiritual technology. Spirituality is a profound technology. It's alive and underlying all of this invisibly, right? And so I captured a few of these. For example, everything that changes is not real. Reality exists in the unchanging eternal. Those who experience both live in truth. It's 4,000 years old or something, right? From the Bhagavad Gita. Or this from the Dhammapada. Free from imaginary negative ideas about life, detached from changing surfaces, in touch with our eternal ground, the wise are not subject to outside agitations and always live in a kind of bliss. That's heaven, right? That's what he's describing, the Buddha. In the Gospel of Thomas, Yeshua says, I am the light that shines above everything. I am the all. All comes from within me, and all comes into me. Split a piece of wood, and I am in it. Turn over a stone, and you will find me. Isn't that beautiful? So there's this, God is in that wall. Everything contains this magic and wonderment. And then Rumi, who's everybody's favorite poet, and I'm very grateful Coleman Barks gave me permission to use his translations for the new book. He said stuff like this: the ocean pours through a jar, and you might say it swims inside the fish. This mystery gives peace to your longing and makes the road home, home. So here's this description of heaven as a continuum. The road home is home. Heaven is always available in this moment, no matter what life you're in. Now granted, when we're free of the low and slow vibrational content, the material aspect of this life, a lot of potential opens up, will open up to us. Of that I'm very sure. Purpose then guides us to discover what karmic responsibilities we have to fulfill. And a lot of people walk around like I did for a good part of my life, having no sense of why I was here or what I was supposed to be doing. I was doing it, but I didn't know that's what I was doing at all, right? So I'll repeat this because it's so important. We're all here to remove the obstacles to love. We're all here to recognize the sacredness of life and that every direction you look in is sacred. Every aspect of life is sacred. And it's my favorite saying that I got from Joseph Campbell, to transcend the human delusion of separateness. This idea that we're all so different when we're not. We're all having the same experience. We're all thinking the same thoughts. If you ever stand in line at a supermarket, you're in the slowest line. They're talking to the person up there too long. And if you could hear everybody's thoughts simultaneously broadcast out loud, it would sound like we were singing a chorus. Don't they know I'm running late? Don't they know? You know. We're the same mind. We're having the same experience. So we're all here to realize this spiritual authenticity, this relationship with the underlying technology, spiritual technology of life, and that we're engaging in these karmic relationships and callings that we've created, that we're creating every day, that we're creating in every moment of our lives. And it's kind of simple. It's really intuitive when you start to think about how to find out what your purpose is. What do you do well? What have you always done well? I couldn't help but become an artist. I had to, because I never had to learn how to draw. I had very little to do with it. So there's something that you do well and have always done well. What do people want you to do? What are they asking you to do? And what do people need you to do? What do your karmic partners in life really need you to do for them? How do you need to show up? And lots of times, regardless of how grand or simple a story that ends up telling, that's your purpose. That's why you're here. And it's okay, no matter its scale. It's all miraculous. And there are no orders, what is it in the Course in Miracles?
Levels of hierarchy.
There's no order of greatness in miracles or something like that? There's no order of difficulties in miracles, right? Miraculous, yeah. We're also here to complete ourselves as the other, to recognize that even if somebody is not at all what you think you are or want to be, that they actually are. So you have to embrace the other, to embrace our opposites, the friend and the enemy, the joy and the suffering that's inevitable in this life, the light and the shadow all the time. I'll run through these very quickly because these are collective purposes that we all have. When we bring this spiritual sanity, when we revere all life as sacred and equal, we live within a spiritual sanity that starts to inform us what we need to be in this world, right? We need to be preservers and protectors of the natural world, to do no harm. For me, this meant becoming a vegetarian and moving towards veganism, but doing no harm. As all great spiritual teachers have taught, do no harm. Don't enter into any system that is causing injury to another one of God's creatures, if you can all avoid it. So practicing compassionate environmentalism, being involved, right? Engage in your community with love-based unity and generosity. It's nice to walk around my neighborhood in Brooklyn and go to stores and when I don't even need to go. I just go by to say hi. And so I know a bunch of people in the neighborhood. I'm part of the Tenants Association in the kind of big building that I live in. And so I've knocked on almost every door, and that's available to all of us to take part in our communities this way, in these love-based unity, you know. To open ourselves to healing potential of holistic, natural, and metaphysical alternatives for care and treatment, I think is very, very important. We're being dictated to by commercial concerns in a lot of respects, and We all know it. What's great about talking to you guys is that it's like talking to the home crowd. You know? I don't have to worry about you understanding because I know that you understand. We have to engage in technology with presence and utilize technology and media-based devices for spiritually sane purposes as much as we possibly can. Because as I said earlier, spirituality itself is a profound form of technology, and you can't unplug it. When the power goes off, it's still there. And nobody is using it to try to convince you to do something wrong or to create bad karma for yourself or for others. So unconditionally rejecting war, violence, and their cultural expressions. I shouldn't have punched that guy. And I never have even thought about doing anything like that to anybody ever again. Now I've learned that you can stand in front of people regardless of what their energy is, and by projecting love and acceptance and compassionate consciousness to them. I've had guys threatening and then ending up crying and hugging me, right? Just by doing nothing, basically. This one gets me in trouble sometimes. Consciously engage in the feminine divine as spiritual wisdom. I'm a member of the men's club, and it wasn't by choice in this life. And it's a difficult club to be in because men are responsible for an awful lot of the ills and suffering in the world. There are a lot of great, wonderful, transcendent, clairvoyant, spiritual, beautiful men. I'm not talking about them. I'm talking about the other ones that are unconscious and that exhibit the characteristics that you will never find in heaven. Right? There's no arrogance, there's no aggression, there's no competition in heaven. Can you imagine a heaven with those things? I can't. Be playful and promote the joy of living through creative and artistic expressions. Be creative and express love creatively. Just as a little postscript, I want to touch on what death is then. Why do we have to die if we're eternal beings? If we're eternal beings, why do we have to die? Why do we have to go through it? Death is really that embrace of the shadow. I married well, and my wife's late uncle was a philosopher, the creator of archetypal psychology, a Jungian named James Hillman, who wrote The Soul's Code and Blue Fire and a lot of other books and stuff. And I was reading through his little book, Suicide and the Soul, and came across this statement that really resonated with me. Without a dying to the world of the old order, there is no place for renewal, because it is illusory to hope that growth is but an additive process, requiring neither sacrifice or death. The soul favors the death experience to usher in change. So there's some aspect of the death experience that we need to go through to get to heaven. Now, whether this actually means dying, no, it doesn't actually mean dying, because we die from different stages of our life. We die when we lose something of great importance to us, a job, for example, a relationship that we have, a home. When somebody that we love and count on dies, there's a kind of a death, there's a grieving that we go through. We die if we ever lose ourselves to hopelessness completely and have the suicide urge, which a lot of people have in the course of their life. The desire to kill the part of yourself that doesn't work, usually the material part of yourself that's not working. And then we actually do die. We actually get old and die in this life. Or in my case, I wasn't even old when it was a shock each time. It was a big surprise. But we're always born anew. So the death experience reduces us to this state of grace, and it's hard to see at the time because it's a painful time, usually, that we're going through, where the illusional limitations imposed on us in our human life, in our material life, vanish. For me, everything I thought I was stopped working. And suddenly I realized I apparently wasn't those things. I was something else. And this is the authentic aspect of ourselves, of our spiritual selves. The sadness that we experience causes us to resonate with these deeper structures of the universe. And that's why sadness is sweet lots of times. You're like, oh, that's awful. Why do I like it so much? You know? Why am I so attracted to this sad story? It's because it opens our hearts and aligns us in terms of our energies with the greater universe. So being reduced to that ground of total humility is a place of extreme freedom, where all spiritual growth and evolution becomes possible. The most critical death is the death of the ego, the death of one's sense of self-importance, the ability to get upset with other people or to be offended, that sort of thing. And people who don't accept that, they get stuck, and you can see them get stuck. They get stuck in ego and their ego expectations. I had to die to that completely over the course of 15 years to get the message of 3 near-death experiences so that it finally came home to me. That happened for me through meditation. So I know that meditation is a path directly into heaven, so to speak. It's available there. This ability to distance myself, to objectify the voice of my ego in my head, to find my authentic self, which doesn't seem to have a lot of personality, but it has a lot of reasonable intelligence, intuitive intelligence there. And to recognize that kind of crazy guy, I call him Bad Bob, who's trying to coach me to do all the wrong things usually. Meditation gives us that, and meditation also then expands us into this illuminative field of divine energy, of divine consciousness, where we experience this transcendent unity. So meditation is really the way to get there. These are my Cliff Notes. Quick tips for happiness that I gave in my first book: radical kindness, radical forgiveness, radical surrender. Be as absolutely kind to everybody as you possibly can be for the next couple days. Just give it a try and watch what happens. You guys don't have to worry about it because you're all so nice. I can tell by looking at you from here. But it's true. If you haven't tried it lately, give it a try. It will totally transform your life. You'll walk into stores and people will go, "Can I help you?" You know, like, "You come on in here." How did that happen? Radical forgiveness: if somebody cuts you off on the road, you just forgive them immediately while you're cutting somebody else off. And radical surrender, I think, is best summed up by this beautiful Native American expression I've heard, that if you're getting too tired rowing upstream, turn around. Take your oar out of the water. The flow of this miraculous technology is carrying you. It's showing you all the time where you need to be, what you need to be, how you need to be. Through this kind of perspective that we can look on each other as dealing with the same difficult forms, in this present moment, that we can all literally reach out and touch and talk to one another and make differences, make things happen, burn up bad karma. I have to do a lot of that. And then with a sense of purpose that we're here to show up for each other, to show up for our karmic relationships. So I think that's pretty much it. We're here to recognize the sacred and eternal in everything, remove the obstacles to the flow of love around us, into us, through us, back out into the world, so that we can become spiritual stewards and channels for the realization of heaven on earth. And right at this very moment, I feel like this could be a room in heaven right now, you know? The energy is alive here, and it's alive in all of our lives all the time if we have the eyes to see it. So thank you very much. guess we can do a Q&A.
Q&A, for sure.
If anybody have any questions? Anything you want to talk about? The Yankees game?
Robert, tell us about your workshop this afternoon, please.
The workshop is going to be going through these things in an experiential way so that we can kind of come into alignment with it. A little bit, this is a lot like what the workshop will be. It'll be more of it, and there'll be a couple guided meditations that will help sort of focus us or put us into that place. And then a little more experiential exploration of this material. Yes?
You described it as all three of yours as being like you remember them instantly. But I've been to several of these, and many other speakers always talk about how sometimes it takes 20 years to remember their NDEs. Did you really remember them as soon as you came back, or did bits and pieces come back?
Bits and pieces have come back over the years. I don't necessarily trust them. That doesn't mean that I don't consider them as being important. And there are parts of them that have become very important to me. I don't include them when I tell my stories, because the stories that I'm telling you, I remembered right away. The next day after my first out-of-body experience, I remembered having had it. There was nobody around to talk to. There was nobody that I could talk to about it that didn't think I was crazy, and they may have been right. And the same thing was true for the other ones too. Really just the next day, I knew that they had happened. But sort of the level of material existence I was at, the unconsciousness that I was experiencing life with, didn't allow me to, own it and to be it at all. It's funny because the second one, the presence, the life review, I don't remember the exact episodes that I was shown, but then I started to remember one where I was a little boy with a kid in the neighborhood, and I had a homemade bow and arrow, and I was threatening him with this bow and arrow. And I didn't realize that this other little boy was a very sensitive soul, and that he was like deeply affected by that threat from a friend of his. I had no idea of it. It kind of stuck with me, and I was with another group of friends who were all familiar with him, and they were all still in San Diego. I'd been in New York for a long time, and I said, "Has anybody seen Phil? Does anybody know what happened to him?" And they said, "Oh yeah, well, Phil committed suicide." And these were the kind of guys I hung around with. Scurrilous, no good guys. Because Phil had not committed suicide. They were joking with me. When my first book came out, Phil got in touch with me. So I get on Facebook, I get, Phil on Facebook. This is Facebook from beyond the grave. I don't know if Mark Zuckerberg knows about this. And Phil was fine and was calling to let me know that he'd gotten my book and that he loved it. And here was this opportunity to amend my karma. And I invited Phil up to New York. He's living around here someplace. In fact, he knew about this event. So. And we had a beautiful day together, and all of that was resolved with the kind of spiritual technology that I'm talking about. So to me, that was a very important aspect that came to me later, and then was confirmed too through my experience. But I don't include that kind of stuff, the stuff that comes to me later. I could include that, and I have now. So. Yes.
Did you meet Jesus in heaven, or Buddha, or any deceased relatives?
Would you repeat the question, please, always?
She said, did I meet Jesus or Buddha, etc., or any deceased relatives? I imagine I did, but I don't remember the specifics of it from the near-death experiences. In experiences I've had since, I have been guided to meet my aunt, who I talked about being at her deathbed. She's been one of my spirit guides all along. And in a kind of an astral travel Reiki session experience that I had, she introduced me to who had been behind me in my other near-death experiences, to my guardian angel, who is also a feminine angel that I know by name and that I carry on conscious conversations with to this day, So, but not having had a very religious background, I guess, my experiences weren't so much informed by any particular religion. I've come to my realizations of Jesus or Yeshua as I know him, or Buddha or Krishna in my meditations since then. And they're profound and important teachers to me. Yes?
Did you have any opportunity to mend the karma between you and the group of people that beat you up?
No, I forgave them. That was the opportunity that I had. I was considering trying to do something about it, but as it turns out, the small town police had been those guys at one time in their life. And so they actually witnessed those guys doing that to me and let them do it. And so when I went to the small town police with my case, they said, well, as far as we can tell, you struck the first blow, so the whole thing is actually your fault. And I've got witnesses that will testify to that. And I didn't have any witnesses at all. I just had my experience. And I realized that I had required forgiveness myself. I had done things that in a way were beating people up. Not actually beating people up, but I had done things that were similar in my life. And I required forgiveness. And when I received it, it liberated me. And I know that it had a similar effect for the person that forgave me. And in other episodes of forgiving others, I realized it works for both parties in a very meaningful way. And I was able just to forgive all those guys. I recognize them for struggling with the divine consciousness, coming through the filter of their karmic form, what they'd created, what they'd been born into, what they had been able to make of it consciously or unconsciously, And so that kind of perspective has helped me to carry on without worrying about it. That's right. Anybody else?
To stay on that event for a moment, because we've had near-death speakers who've come in here and said if they weren't at a certain place in a certain time, this other thing would occur to them, so they got an experience to change their life. Do you have any feeling that, and you talked about pre-birth planning, do you have any feeling your experience with getting knocked around like that could have been a pre-birth plan?
I imagine that it all is, and I'm probably a great candidate for spiritual regression, right? For reincarnative regression stuff. Yes, is the short answer to it. I mean, looking back on it, everything has so much form. The thing about the spiritual formation of our lives and following these principles forward, projecting them forward proactively, is that you don't really see it going in this direction. But when you look in the rearview mirror, it all comes into perfect focus, how it happened. And that leads me back to how I opened. I'm either very unlucky or I'm very lucky. And I realize that I'm really very lucky. I'm very lucky to be here and be able to, bring these experiences to people.
I want to add that I really like that you referred to our spirituality as technology, because I think so many times people talk about technology, and they're thinking of all the social media and Facebook and computers, and really, our original technology has nothing to do with anything mechanical. It's our guidance system that we innately have, and so it helps me to hear words so strongly like that. And thank you.
That's the interesting thing about the profound operative metaphor of the internet. The internet is global consciousness. We are experiencing global consciousness through that means. We know in a transpersonal way that it exists already. We know the reality of quantum physics and how energy is simultaneously occurring everywhere, right? And so this transpersonal awareness is part of it now, and technology is merging with it. And you get that kind of the matrix type thing too, where there's an overlap that's happening now. A lot of people, the fearful aspects of our culture are afraid of artificial intelligence, as they call it. But our actual, our intuitive, our divine intelligence is deeper and more solid and grounding than any of that. So that will always be shifting on top of what's underlying it.
Thank you.
Did somebody back at?
I actually had two questions. Maybe they can't both be answered today, but I'm fascinated by your talk about karma. Sometimes I feel that my entire life has been reading karma, one bad experience at a time, and having to overcome that. And I get confused in taking ownership, or I don't know if I'm meant to face it, or if I'm meant to forgive these people that do things to me, or I get very confused by it. And part of it has come up because 2 years ago I had a stroke and I was dying and I was alone in my bedroom, and Jesus talked to me in terms of getting around the bed and being saved. And I wanted to know what your qualifications for near death are, because I've been a member of the AA for years, and I always figured that meant that you actually were physically proclaimed that you were dead and that somehow you came back. But what is it called when you're sort of in a state of limbo for 16 hours and you don't die, and yet the physicians say that you were dying and you came back, and they have no explanation of why I'm here?
That qualifies in my book. That's near death.
That is?
Yes.
But I don't have memories of seeing a light and all of these, Hollywood stories
Right.
of anything happening. I just very clearly remember the direction that I was given around the bed and what things to do in order to propel myself forward to get help.
Yeah, I think you kind of answered your question at the beginning, where you do need to take ownership for it, and just to simply show up and recognize that these are the circumstances of your life. You do need to forgive whoever needs to be forgiven in the picture, including God if that's necessary, right? Because there is a way that you can engage in life to more positively energize these experiences, even as bad as they are. This is a difficult life, and hard things happen for everybody. So in the same way that you're standing in line and complaining about the cashier, there are people that are going through physical maladies and catastrophes that are very similar to yours, simultaneous to you. And so this kind of surrender into the reality that I'm going to be alive, I was alive before this, I'm going to be alive after this, and that this is showing itself to me for the experience of what? So that I can embrace the shadow, so that I can attain this kind of absolute humility that allows me to be completely open and completely authentic. When you're in that situation in bed, none of the things that you're supposed to be, that you wanted people to think of you, matter at all anymore, nor do they matter to any of us having that experience. So that's this grounding spirituality that's really a moment of great grace. This is a sacred bubble. And anybody who occupies that sacred bubble is having a near-death experience to me. It could be a soldier in a foxhole who only expects to have the bomb land on him in the next minute. In that moment, there is the realization of that passage and of that essential grounding to the authenticity of our spiritual being. You know what I mean?
I do.
And it's the same thing as laying in the hospital when you are dying, in that moment when you're dying. One is actually dying. The other is only thinking that you're going to die. You know, so it's a heart-mind connection to the experience that to me qualifies it as such. I have no documentation of the medical aspects of my cases. I had the guy say he's back, and those guys have an on-the-ground understanding of it. So I repeat that because that was informative to me. Nobody at the hospital talked to me because they took me down to a loading dock and put me in a yellow cab and sent me home because I didn't have insurance. So nobody described what had been going on for the last 20 hours. I was in hours of surgery at one point, that kind of thing. So own it, occupy it, recognize that it's love in all its various forms, you know, and that the shadow side is part of the greater reality, and that this life apparently is a school. This is a difficult school. It's hard.
What do you do with people when you must speak to tons or have already spoken to tons of people explaining your books, etc.? What do you do when they don't receive what happened to you? Because inside this room, people seem to understand or have some perception of how that could happen. Other people, including my own family, think it was just very weird.
Yeah. I love skeptics.
Something must be wrong with me that happened.
Yeah, I love skeptics. They're great. I mean, obviously, it's really wonderful to be in front of a group of people like this because, like I said, it's the home crowd. You know, you can't go wrong with you guys. You all are on the same page. But when people say, "Oh yeah, that is just too crazy," or you're gonna tell me that all of this takes place, this is all so out there, that is so crazy, and I will point out to them that we are on a planet in outer space. That's where we're starting here. Okay? You want to talk weird and crazy? Let's start with that. Okay, that's your solid reality. But you know, again, it's in a matter of carrying a certain kind of energy to people in the moment that you're with them. And just say, you know, I understand your doubts, and I appreciate it. I felt that way myself for a long time, and I did. I had no idea that any of this was a real kind of thing until it became my reality, you know. And you know that they're somewhere along that process. And then if you are there for them with what I call angel eyes, if you witness them as an angel might witness a person, then they're telling you how much love they need added and when.
Are you feeling it part of your almost responsibility to talk about it? Because for a while I thought I should. I kept being confused by what did God want me to learn from this? What was my purpose? Was it to talk about it? And then I started to just quiet down and not say anything. And that's kind of where I am now. But when I saw this, it seemed to be more than serendipity that I came into the area yesterday and saw your book.
Synchronicities are glimpses into the reality of spiritual technology. They are openings up into the greater reality. I find that with most spiritual stuff that if I'm having doubts as to whether I should do it, that means I should be doing it. Because those are vestiges of my ego mind and my fears that are manifesting themselves to try to head that off, to stop that, and to limit the miraculousness of this life and the possibility of what I might be able to bring to it.
So the other aspects of your life, the art, I'm an artist, the artistry and all of your different relationships and your books and all of your jobs, do you feel that this is fulfilling the real purpose of your life behind all of those near-death experiences, or how do you make sense of that?
Yes, yeah. I've always had a difficulty remaining tethered to all those material things. That was a big problem with the way that I had to live all those lives in sort of unconsciousness. And I still do to a certain respect. Faith is not a well-lit place, you know. So you have to just be willing to open your heart and allow that light to illuminate all the corners, all the dark corners of everything all the time. That means that sometimes I face financial ruin, you know. Supporting a book without the support, financial support of a publisher is faith.
Yeah.
I'm turning that over to the universe, you know, all the time. But I'm here, I'm still here after all the things I've told you about. So it, you know, it can't be too tough compared to that, I hope. Yeah.
Do you have a personal experience to talk about, now when we are able to step out of our little piece of heaven and see the big picture of the world, how that has helped you to understand and accept what's going on in the world overall, you know, the wars and the things that are happening now?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. The nature of this world is difficult. And when there are ego-based material forms at stake, when there's competition and aggression and those kind of what we generally consider to be male characteristics that are arising all the time, these levels of unconsciousness, then one can see that the world is kind of a race between the growing consciousness that we're all experiencing. We didn't even used to recycle when I was a kid, right? We had one 1/100th the awareness on a spiritual level, on a holistic level, as we do now. So to me, it's very clear that, you know, that stand is about to start talking to me. Consciousness is flowing into everything. And what we see as unconscious is, it takes up a larger, bigger the picture, a larger part of the picture, because the means that we have to see it is controlled by those fear-based people. I liken it to a big elementary school where grades 1 through 6 go together simultaneously. They're all adults. But the kids in the early grades feel like they can control things. They're fearful, and they want to be in charge. And so they end up being the bullies. And the 5th and 6th graders have to basically watch them do all the terrible things that they're doing and bring enough love to the whole thing to balance it out. Because the reality is that everything that you hear about that's fearful and dangerous in the world is really just a small part of it. What we have is a misperception problem. When we perceive ourselves as part of this beautiful spiritual technology, we realize that consciousness is a much greater ground of reality than this little pocket of unconsciousness that dictates so much of our reality to us. It's not the case, really. There are way more of us than there are of them. It's just that they're big and loud and obnoxious. God bless them. They have to be. This is their karma. They're trying to express. They're trying to find love. They're just starting at a low level, you know. So it helps a lot to watch the antics that are going on. When you see somebody as living through their pain, struggling, and so many of our leaders are in pain. They're clearly in pain. Who would ever want to do that? Right? And so this is an interesting thing about humility and the power of humility, as opposed to the need to be in charge, the need to have power. Who is really powerful? Who are the most powerful people in the history of the world? You know, Mother Teresa, Jesus. You know, Hitler killed a lot of people, but Gandhi turned the hearts of 1 billion people around. You know? That's the power of humility. It's awesome. And when you think of your own life, it's not the people who wear the flashiest clothes or have the biggest cars that stick with you, hopefully. It's those people that you know who just seem to be doing it really well, really right, you know, that are love-filled and that have balanced, holistic lives and don't talk about it a great deal, always show up for you. I have no problem with that. That's the real power of life, and there's a lot more of that in the world than there is these pockets of pain and strife. We just tend to hear about them more. That's what makes the news. Yes?
You know, I appreciate you seem to have somehow gotten the divine consciousness behind the spiritual consciousness. And when Jesus taught the kingdom of heaven was at hand, of course a lot of people felt it was going to come, but he really meant it was really here. So this is why I'm showing up at your workshop to make a list of how to return to it, because it is actually here. That same loving presence which is there. It's just that heaven doesn't have pollution, if you will.
Right.
It doesn't have the other things.
Right.
You know, so
Well, and it's problematic even for
yeah.
people that are strict adherents to the New Testament.
Yeah.
When in Luke he says, you don't have to look there or look here because the kingdom is within you.
Yeah.
That was kind of like, how do we make it so it's only within him?
But it's actually all pervasive and all present and all around
Yeah.
equally now. It's just that so much else is going on too.
Yeah.
Seems.
Yeah. My sense of the Christian ethic and of Jesus as a metaphysical teacher is more Gnostic and less institutional.
Mm.
And so I'd be more closely aligned with the Course in Miracles of Jesus. My Jesus is Yeshua from the Gnostic Gospels. That's who I sit with on my rock. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's the same thing. There's these spirits that guide us and protect us and teach us.
So did you paint that beautiful art behind you?
No, that's just a photograph.
Oh.
Yeah. Yeah. So I could always paint like off of photographs. It was never, I got all kinds of A's on my reports when I was in elementary school by drawing a cool picture to go with it.
Yeah, I wanted to ask more about your experience after 9/11, which I think is a very important experience that you had, with the sense of all those spirits and all those all around you. And I wanted to ask if you had a sense that you were able to be helpful to them by registering the fact that they were there, or perhaps something else. If you would be comfortable telling us a little more about what that was like and what those people at that time, those spirits, were needing.
Yeah. Well, you know, that was sort of the moment, my kind of transformative moment. I was deeply ensconced in a material reality at that time. I had come back to New York, and for no good reason, I had gotten right on top of things again. I was hired by networks, and I was doing work for big publications. I was dating a Latvian woman at the time who was an artist also, and I had no sense of spirituality as having formed my life. I didn't want to go there. And when 9/11 happened, the woman that I was dating at the time lived very close to it. Her life was completely turned around by it. I had been projecting a lot of what I wanted life to be onto her, and she didn't want any part of it. And so she was rejecting me at the same time as this happened. And I walked out into the street and had this palpable sense of this cyclonic surge of souls, of disembodied souls around me. And I was supposed to be a reasonable, normal, media-based guy still. I was clinging on to that. And it was proving that I was right, because I was financially doing well and stuff, but I was terribly unhappy, and I was trying to capture this person and convince them of something, and they were in an appropriate place, having witnessed this catastrophe. And here I was experiencing this catastrophe on a level that I could not repudiate anymore at all. And that's when I started to recognize that these things had happened to me all through my life, that I had been present for these. And I'd been present for a number of, I was at the Phoenix Lights, stuff like that. It was like mass UFO experiences and stuff like that. And so this was another one of those moments where, I had to seek out something like this. And I basically, I remember it as being a time when a giant hand grabbed me by the top of the head and just started showing me things. You're going to go here, and you're going to do that. And that's how my life went from that point on. And led to being published out of the complete blue. So, yeah. I think the reality of spiritual presence and being reached me through that catastrophe. But the Sufis say that you look into the face of catastrophe so that when you turn around 180 degrees, bliss is in the other direction. Right?
Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions? Yes.
I'm curious about your photo and what it is on the back. Is it a life preserver to prevent a drowning?
That's my blanket.
A drowning
That's my blankie. And that's my stick right there. And that's a little 2x4 I put across, and I use my stick to make sure I get across to my right. I'd like to close with this one little thing, if I may. It's such a beautiful little bit. It comes from Rumi, and it has to do with the difficult nature of this life. We go like this, and then we go like that. And I think Will Rogers said, "How come nobody told me when I was at the top?" Right. I saw grief drinking a cup of sorrow and called out, "It tastes sweet, does it not?" "You have caught me," grief answered, "and you have ruined my business. How can I sell sorrow when you know it's a blessing?" Isn't that something? So thank you very much. Thank you very much.
So, okay, so the people